Welcome, friends, and settle in, because tonight we are going to take a gentle walk together, the kind of walk you can only take in memory, past the quiet places where some of the warmest faces of one of television's most beloved families have come to rest. For 8 seasons, from the late 1980s into the middle of the 1990s, a certain house in San Francisco, with its bright red door and its bay windows and its impossibly full living room, welcomed us in every single week. And inside it we found a widowed father, his brother-in-law, his goofball best friend, 3 little girls, and a rotating parade of grandparents, neighbors, sweethearts, and famous visitors who wandered through the Tanner front hall and straight into our hearts. That house was never really about the jokes, though there were plenty of those. It was about the idea that no matter how many people you crammed under one roof, there was always room for one more, always a hug waiting at the top of the stairs, always a heartfelt talk set to soft music before the credits rolled. Tonight we honor the men and women who built that feeling, and who have since taken their final bow, and we are going to visit 8 of them, one by one, traveling from the manicured lawns of the Hollywood Hills to a windswept stretch of the Pacific, from a grand mausoleum in Glendale to a quiet Canadian town where the winters bite. Some of these people you knew by name the instant you saw their face. Some of them you loved without ever learning who they were. A few of them left behind a headstone you could stand before and touch, and a few of them chose the open sea instead, their ashes given to the same ocean that framed so many California sunsets. Every one of them left the world a little kinder than they found it, and every one of them made millions of strangers feel, for half an hour at a time, like they belonged to a bigger family than the one they were born into. We will tell their stories honestly and with affection, celebrating the lives without ever lingering in the sorrow, and we will let each of them go the way they deserve, gently, gratefully, with a smile. So, take my arm, keep your voice low the way you would in any resting place, and let us begin our journey where the whole show truly began, with the father of that full house himself, high in the Hollywood Hills, on a green shelf of land where the freeway hum fades into birdsong and the California haze softens every edge, sits Mount Sinai Memorial Park, a serene Jewish cemetery of rolling lawns and pale stone, and here, beneath a marker bearing the name Robert Lane Saget, rests the man the whole country came to think of as America's dad. Bob Saget was born in Philadelphia in the spring of 1956, the son of a supermarket executive, and he grew up quick-witted and tender-hearted in equal measure, a boy who used humor the way other people used armor. He studied at Temple University, where a film he made won a student honor and a professor urged him toward a life in front of an audience, and by his 20s he was grinding it out in comedy clubs with an act that was, let us be honest, gloriously filthy, a rapid-fire, no-holds-barred stand-up that would have scandalized the parents watching him on Friday nights. Because that was the great contradiction of Bob Saget, the joke the whole industry loved. To the world, he was the sweetest, cleanest, most wholesome father figure on television, Danny Tanner, the widowed sportscaster raising 3 girls with the help of his brother-in-law and his best friend, a man so devoted to tidiness that he vacuumed his vacuum, a man who ended every crisis with a soft speech and a hug. And yet the real Bob, the one his friends knew, was the most delightfully filthy comic in the business, a man whose live act could make a sailor blush. For 8 seasons, he anchored that house on Full House, and at the very same time, he hosted America's Funniest Home Videos, narrating a decade of tumbling toddlers and misbehaving pets with a grin, becoming a fixture in living rooms twice over. Later, a whole new generation would know only his voice, as the unseen narrator of the sitcom How I Met Your Mother, the older, wiser storyteller looking back with warmth on his younger days. But the thing to know about Bob Saget, the thing that mattered most, was his enormous generosity. When his own sister died of a cruel and disfiguring disease called scleroderma, he threw himself into fighting it, raising money and awareness for decades, using his fame as a tool for good, sitting at bedsides, making the sick laugh. He was, by every account of everyone who knew him, one of the genuinely kind men in a business that does not always reward kindness. In January of 2022, Bob was doing what he loved, touring the country with his stand-up, and after a show in Florida, he returned to his hotel room in Orlando, and there, sometime in the night, he died. He was 65 years old. His family later shared that he had accidentally struck his head and, thinking nothing of it, had gone to sleep, never to wake. There was no villain in the story, no scandal, only the smallest of accidents ending one of the largest of hearts, and the whole country grieved as though it had lost a member of its own family, because in a sense it had. His castmates, the girls he had helped raise on camera and off, spoke of him as a second father. His headstone in these Hollywood hills bears a tender line, remembering a loving and devoted husband, father, son, and friend. A man who, it says, brought people together and made them laugh. Stand here a moment in the quiet, and you can almost hear him doing exactly that. And now let us leave these hills and travel down into the sprawl of Los Angeles, following the thread of that same fictional family, because the house Bob Saget anchored was full of relatives, and one of the most beloved was a proud, blustering, tender Greek patriarch played by a man whose ashes rest close by, kept not in the ground but in the loving keeping of his family. John Aprea was born in the spring of 1941 in Englewood, New Jersey, the son of Italian immigrants, a greengrocer's boy raised in the world of stoops and storefronts and Sunday dinners, and he carried that old world warmth with him to the very end. As a young man in New York, he took acting classes and worked odd jobs to survive, and the story goes that he was discovered by none other than the movie star Steve McQueen, who helped open the door that led to Aprea's film debut in the classic thriller Bullitt in 1968. But the role that would define his early career came a few years later, when Francis Ford Coppola cast him in one of the most celebrated films ever made, The Godfather Part II, as the young version of the doomed, gentle mobster Salvatore Tessio. Aprea had actually auditioned for the lead in the original Godfather, and though that role went to another, he found his place in the sequel, sharing scenes with Robert De Niro and calling the experience the high point of his life, surrounded, as he put it, by the best in the business. For decades afterward, he was one of those wonderfully familiar faces, the kind you recognized without ever quite placing, a working actor who turned up everywhere, on the soap operas where he played brooding romantic figures, on Matt Houston and Knots Landing and Falcon Crest, in New Jack City and a dozen other films, a handsome, versatile presence who never stopped working. And then, to a generation of children who had never heard of The Godfather, he became someone else entirely, Nick Katsopoulos, the loud, loving, exterminator father of John Stamos' Uncle Jesse on Full House. Aprea's Nick was all bluster and heart, a proud Greek papa forever bickering with his wife and forever adoring his family, and he returned to the role decades later on the revival Fuller House, stepping back into that same warm chaos as though no time had passed. Off-screen he was, by every account, a gentleman of the old school, gracious and grateful and devoted, a man who had spent 60 years in an unforgiving industry and had somehow kept his decency intact. In the summer of 2024, John Aprea died at his home in Los Angeles, surrounded by the people he loved, having lived a long and full life. He was 83 years old, and the cause was simply the natural close of many good decades. He was cremated in a private ceremony, and his ashes were kept by his family rather than placed beneath any stone, so there is no marker to visit, no plot to find on a map, only the memory carried by those who loved him and the reels of film where he lives on forever. Young Tessio in the shadows, proud Nick in the sunshine, one of the great familiar faces of American television and film. From one grandfather of that fictional family to another, let us now travel a very long way north, out of the California warmth entirely and up into the mountains of British Columbia to the town of Kelowna in Canada, where the winters are hard and the lake is deep and cold, because here, in the country of his birth, lived a man who gave Full House one of its most quietly devastating moments. Jack Kruschen was born Jacob Kruschen in Winnipeg in the spring of 1922, and his path to acting was pure serendipity. Discovered as a teenager, performing in a high school operetta by a scout who heard something in his voice. That voice would become his fortune, for Kruschen came up in the golden age of radio drama, one of the great unseen actors of the airwaves, a man who could be a villain, a hero, a frightened victim, or a kindly old neighbor with nothing but the sound he made into a microphone, serving even in the armed forces radio during the war. When the cameras came, he made the leap gracefully, becoming one of Hollywood's most dependable character actors, the sort of solid, expressive presence that directors trusted with anything. He appeared in the alien invasion classic The War of the Worlds, in the tense thriller Cape Fear opposite Gregory Peck, in westerns and comedies and dramas beyond counting, and in 1960 he reached the summit of his profession, earning an Academy Award nomination for his warm, humane turn as the good-hearted doctor next door in Billy Wilder's masterpiece, The Apartment. An Oscar nominee, a working man's actor, he had a particular gift for playing warm ethnic grandfathers, and it was that gift that brought him, late in his long career, to the Tanner house. On Full House, he played Papuli, the beloved Greek great-grandfather of the Tanner children, appearing in only 2 episodes, and yet leaving a mark that fans still speak of 30 years later. For in his second appearance, in an episode called The Last Dance, the show did something rare and brave for a family sitcom. Papuli, visiting the family, teaching the children to dance, filling the house with joy, died peacefully in his sleep, and the show did not look away. Little Michelle's heartbroken confusion, her struggle to understand where her great-grandfather had gone, was so delicately handled that the producers had consulted an expert in explaining death to children before they ever filmed it, and Uncle Jesse's grief. His decision to name a boat Papuli in the old man's honor gave a generation of young viewers their very first, gentle lesson in loss. It is a strange and tender thing that Jack Kruschen, playing a grandfather who dies in his sleep, gave so many children their first understanding of mortality. In the spring of 2002, after years of declining health, Jack Kruschen died at his home in Kelowna, back in the Canada where his life had begun. At the age of 80, his resting place was never made a matter of public record, and so there is no famous grave to stand before, no marker for the pilgrims, only the quiet of those Canadian mountains and the enduring image of an old man teaching children to dance before he slipped away, an Oscar-nominated actor whose gentlest role taught a generation how to say goodbye. Now let us return to Los Angeles, back to the warm sprawl of the city, to a small and star-studded cemetery tucked improbably among the high-rises of the Westwood neighborhood, a place called Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park, where some of the most famous names in Hollywood rest, shoulder to shoulder in a patch of green no bigger than a city block. And here we find a woman whose face launched 1,000 laughs. Doris Roberts was born Doris Mae Green in St. Louis in the autumn of 1925, and hers was a childhood shadowed by hardship. Her father gone before her teenage years, her name eventually taken from a stepfather, her ambition forged early and never dimmed. She fell in love with performing as a small girl and never fell out of it, and across a career that stretched an astonishing 7 decades, she became one of the most reliable and beloved character actresses in America. A small woman with an enormous presence who could steal any scene she chose to. She worked constantly, on Broadway and in films and on television, sharp and funny and deeply human, and she collected honors the way other people collect stamps, winning 5 Emmy Awards over the length of her career, most of them for the role that made her a household name at an age when many actresses are pushed aside. The meddling, loving, impossible mother Marie Barone on the sitcom Everybody Loves Raymond, a performance of such comic precision that audiences adored and dreaded her in equal measure. But long before that late career triumph, Doris Roberts paid a memorable visit to the Tanner house, playing Claire Tanner, Danny's own mother, in an episode lovingly titled Granny Tanny. And here was a delicious bit of casting. For if you ever wondered where Danny Tanner got his obsessive tidiness, his need to alphabetize and sanitize and organize the whole world, the show gave you the answer in the form of his mother, a woman as devoted to cleaning as her son, the apple, it turned out, having fallen very close to the tree. Roberts brought to that single visit the same warmth and comic timing that would define her whole career, and she made Granny Tanny feel, in one episode, like family. Off-screen, she was a passionate advocate, testifying before Congress about the mistreatment of the elderly in America, using her fame to speak for those who had no voice, a woman of conscience, as well as comedy. In the spring of 2016, Doris Roberts died in her sleep in Los Angeles at the age of 90, having worked almost to the very end, still sharp, still funny, still beloved. She was laid to rest here in Westwood, in that small and crowded garden of stars, in the company of screen legends, a fitting neighborhood for a woman who had spent 70 years making the famous and the forgotten alike laugh until they wept. Stand here among these markers, and you are standing among Hollywood royalty, and Doris Roberts, the widow's mother, the clean freak's clean freak, the impossible and irreplaceable Marie, belongs there as surely as any of them. From this crowded garden of the famous, let us now travel to the edge of the continent, to the shore itself, because our next two friends chose not the ground but the ocean, and to honor the first of them, we must stand on the California coast and look out at the wide gray Pacific, listening to the surf. For it was here that the ashes of a tall, red-haired, endlessly funny woman were given to the sea. Marcia Wallace was born in the small town of Creston, Iowa, in the autumn of 1942, the daughter of a general storekeeper, a bright, gangly, irrepressible girl who majored in theater at a little Iowa college, and then did what dreamers do, packing her bags and moving to New York City to chase a life on the stage. She had a look and a laugh that no one forgot, tall and striking with a great cascade of red hair and a warm, booming, unmistakable laugh. And it was that quality, that vivid comic presence, that carried her onto television, first as a frequent and delightful talk show guest, and then, in a role written especially for her, as the wisecracking receptionist Carol on the classic 1970s comedy The Bob Newhart Show, where she traded barbs with the star and won the hearts of a generation. But her most enduring work was one you heard far more often than you saw, for Marcia Wallace was the voice of the beloved, weary, chain-smoking schoolteacher Edna Krabappel on the animated series The Simpsons, a role she voiced for more than 2 decades, winning an Emmy Award for it, her distinctive laugh echoing out of that cartoon classroom into hundreds of millions of homes around the world. And in between those 2 famous comedies, she paid her visit to Full House, appearing as Mrs. Carruthers, one of the Tanner family's neighbors, lending her warmth and her timing to that busy San Francisco street. Yet the truest measure of Marcia Wallace was not taken on any soundstage. In the mid-1980s, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and rather than hide it, as so many did in that era, she spoke about it openly and bravely, becoming a tireless advocate and a beacon of hope, traveling the country to tell frightened women that a diagnosis was not a death sentence, that you could live and laugh and work and thrive, that she was proof. She turned her own hardest battle into a gift for strangers, and she carried terrible private griefs of her own, including the loss of her beloved husband to cancer only a few years into their marriage, and still, she kept laughing, kept fighting, kept giving. In the autumn of 2013, after living with cancer for the better part of 30 years, Marcia Wallace died in Los Angeles at the age of 70. The animated schoolteacher she voiced was quietly retired in tribute, a rare honor. Her character's classroom left forever empty because no one could replace that laugh, and she was cremated, her ashes scattered here upon the Pacific Ocean, given to the water and the wind, so that there is no stone to visit, only the endless coastline and the sound of the waves, a fitting resting place for a spirit that was always too big to be held in one small plot of earth. And now, staying here on this same shore, looking out at this same restless sea, we honor the second of our friends given to the ocean, a woman whose laugh was even more famous than Marcia Wallace's, the cackling, self-mocking, gloriously fearless queen of American comedy who visited the Tanner house as nothing less than herself. Phyllis Diller was born Phyllis Ada Driver in Lima, Ohio, in the summer of 1917, and hers is one of the great late-blooming stories in all of show business. A woman who did not become a star until she was nearly 40, a housewife and mother of many who had spent years scraping by, writing ad copy and raising children, before she walked onto the stage of a San Francisco nightclub in the mid-1950s and discovered that she could make a room full of strangers scream with laughter. And oh, how she made them scream. She built a comic character unlike anyone before her, a wild-haired, outrageously dressed, cackling caricature of a housewife who told brutal, hilarious jokes about her own looks, her terrible cooking, her long-suffering imaginary husband she called Fang, a woman who turned every insult inward and made self-deprecation into an art form. In an era when stand-up comedy was almost entirely a man's world, Phyllis Diller kicked the door down and held it open for every woman who came after, a genuine pioneer disguised as a joke, and she became a national institution, appearing in film after film and on countless television specials, many of them alongside her friend and frequent partner Bob Hope, her machine gun cackle becoming one of the most recognizable sounds in American entertainment. She was, in private, a serious and cultured woman, an accomplished pianist and a gifted painter, thoughtful and generous and endlessly curious, and she was famously open about the plastic surgeries she underwent, joking about them as freely as she joked about everything else, refusing to let vanity or shame have the last word. And into the Tanner house she came, as herself, in an episode fittingly built around show business, bringing that unmistakable laugh into the San Francisco living room for one memorable visit, a legend gracing a family sitcom with her singular presence. Phyllis Diller lived a very long life, a life she filled to the brim, and in the late summer of 2012, she died peacefully at her home in Los Angeles at the remarkable age of 95, reportedly with a smile on her face, which is exactly how she would have wanted to go. Like her fellow comedian Marsha Wallace, whom we have just remembered, she was cremated and her ashes were scattered upon the Pacific Ocean, so that these two funny women, who each visited that full house, now share the same endless resting place, the great blue water off the California coast. And if you stand here long enough and the wind is right, you can almost imagine that cackle carried on the breeze. From the open ocean, let us turn back inland now, to one of the grandest and most beautiful cemeteries in all of America, the sprawling, hillside expanse of Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, with its manicured lawns and its reproductions of European art and its quiet gardens. And here rests a woman who was, for millions of children, across 2 generations, the very picture of sweetness and grace. Annette Funicello was born in Utica, New York, in the autumn of 1942, and her family moved west to Southern California when she was small, which turned out to be the luckiest move of her life, for it placed her within reach of a man named Walt Disney, who saw her dancing at a recital when she was 12 years old, and chose her, on the spot, to be one of the original Mouseketeers on his brand new television program, The Mickey Mouse Club. She was an instant sensation, the most popular of all the Mouseketeers, a dark-eyed, dimpled, wholesome girl next door whom the whole country seemed to adopt at once, and she became Walt Disney's personal favorite, a young star he protected and guided as she grew. As a teenager, she recorded a string of bright, bubbly pop hits, and as a young woman she reigned over an entire genre of cheerful movies, the beach party films, splashing through the surf and singing on the sand alongside her frequent co-star Frankie Avalon, embodying an innocent, sun-drenched American summer that never seemed to end. And when Full House needed exactly that kind of nostalgic magic, they turned to her and to Avalon, bringing the 2 beach movie icons into an episode as themselves, playing the stars of a fictional show, in a warm and funny visit that let a new generation meet the sweetheart their parents had adored, complete with a gentle running gag about a devoted fan who had once mailed her a love letter scented with furniture polish. But the truest measure of Annette Funicello came not in her stardom but in the way she faced its ending. In the early 1990s, she revealed to the world that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a cruel and progressive disease of the nervous system. And rather than retreat into private suffering, she went public, in part to stop the rumors, and she founded an organization to fund research into neurological diseases, turning her own decline into hope for others, facing a merciless illness with the same grace and good cheer she had shown the cameras her whole life. For years the disease took more and more from her mobility, her voice, and still she endured, beloved, remembered, a symbol of courage to everyone who had grown up loving her. In the spring of 2013, Annette Funicello died from complications of the disease she had battled for more than 2 decades, in Bakersfield, California, at the age of 70, and the mouse ears she had worn as a child were, for a moment, lowered all across America. She was laid to rest here at Forest Lawn in Glendale, in these gardens where so many stars of Hollywood's golden age have come to rest, a fitting home for Walt Disney's favorite, the girl next door who never stopped being sweet, whose smile outlasted even the illness that finally stilled it. And now we come to the last stop on our journey, and for it we must travel one final time, north along the coast to the lovely seaside town of Santa Barbara, where the mountains meet the ocean and a small, historic cemetery sits on a bluff above the Pacific. And here, beneath a white headstone that stands out proudly against the darker stones around it, marked with a bright red maple leaf, rests a man who was Canadian to his core and beloved on both sides of the border. Alan Thicke was born in the spring of 1947 in Kirkland Lake, Ontario, a small mining town in the Canadian North, and he grew into one of those effortlessly charming, multi-talented performers who seemed able to do absolutely everything. Before he was ever a familiar face, he was a familiar sound, a gifted songwriter who penned the catchy theme tunes to a string of famous television shows, music that lodged itself in the national memory even as his own name went unspoken. He hosted talk shows and game shows with an easy, quick-witted grace, first in Canada and then in the United States. But the role that made him a star, that made him beloved, was that of Dr. Jason Seaver, the warm, wise, gently sarcastic psychiatrist father at the center of the hit family sitcom Growing Pains, a television dad so likable that he became, for the whole decade of the 1980s, one of America's favorite fathers. He was, in real life, a devoted father too, raising sons who followed him into show business, one of whom would become an enormously successful pop musician in his own right. And Thicke wore his family pride openly and warmly. His connection to that Full House in San Francisco came late, and it came to the revival, the sequel series that reunited the Tanner family for a new generation, where Alan Thicke appeared as himself, playing gently against his wholesome image, a delightful cameo that brought one beloved television dad into the home of another. It aired in 2016, and there is something almost unbearably poignant about that timing, for it was in December of that very same year that Alan Thicke's story reached its sudden end. He was doing something he loved, playing ice hockey with his teenage son on a rink in California, a Canadian to the last, when he suffered a tearing of the aorta, a swift and catastrophic failure of the heart's great vessel, and he died that same day. He was 69 years old, and the suddenness of it, a healthy, vital, beloved man gone in an afternoon at play with his boy, stunned everyone who knew him and everyone who had grown up watching him. He was laid to rest here in Santa Barbara, above the sea, and his family chose for him a white headstone that would stand out proudly among the rest, and they adorned it with a red maple leaf, so that anyone who passed would know at a glance that here lay a proud Canadian, adored by his wife, loved by his sons and his family and his friends, and forever missed. It is a bright, warm marker for a bright, warm man, and it is a fitting place to end our walk, above the same Pacific Ocean that has appeared again and again on our journey, the ocean that took the ashes of Marcia Wallace and Phyllis Diller, the ocean that framed Annette Funicello's beach movie summers, the ocean that watches over so many of the people we have visited today. And so our journey comes to its close. We began in the Hollywood Hills with the father of that Full House, America's dad, the kindest of comedians, and from there we traveled to honor a proud Greek papa whose ashes his family keeps close, an Oscar-nominated grandfather who taught a generation how to grieve, a clean freak's clean freak of a grandmother resting among the stars, two fearlessly funny women given to the wide Pacific, a beach movie sweetheart who faced her illness with unbreakable grace, and finally, a beloved television dad who died at play, a proud Canadian above the sea. 8 lives, 8 goodbyes, 8 faces that walked through the Tanner front door and into our memory, and never quite left. Some of them rest beneath stones you could visit, in Westwood and Glendale and Santa Barbara and the Hollywood Hills, and some of them rest in the ocean, or in the loving keeping of their families, or in quiet places far from any spotlight. But all of them rest now, their work finished, their laughter given, their kindness spent freely on strangers who loved them back without ever meeting them. That, in the end, is the strange and beautiful gift of the people who make our favorite shows. They come into our homes when we are young and they stay with us as we grow old, and long after they have taken their final bow, we can still push open that bright red door in our memory and find them exactly where we left them, waiting at the top of the stairs with a hug and a heartfelt talk and the soft music swelling underneath. Thank you for walking with me today, and for keeping their memory, and for remembering that behind every warm face on that Full House was a real person who lived and loved and mattered. Rest well, every one of them. And rest well, friends. Until we walk together again.